Christmas may seem a long time ago now, although with the cold we've had for the last couple of weeks, it may feel like, yeah, this is a bit Christmassy. I don't know about you, but this year, with the price of stamps skyrocketing and Royal Mail pretty unpredictable in terms of delivery, I decided that I would take a leap, and instead of posting lots of Christmas cards, where I could this year I would send them online. For some years I've received cards from friends through the Jackie Lawson website. Some of you may be very familiar with it. And I decided to dip my toe in the water this year, and it was quite a different experience trying to decide which card I wanted to send to which person online of the selection there, rather than going along a range of cards on a shelf. There's one particular card that I sent to some friends that I want to show you now. And those of you who are familiar with Jackie Lawson cards, because you've either received them or you send them, will know that her cards are little half-minute videos. One of the friends that I sent the card to sent back his Jackie Lawson thank you card, saying, "It made me wonder what print I leave." That made me start thinking too, because it had never hit me like that. I want to show you an ancient church. It's in Bishopsgate in the City of London, just down the road from Liverpool Street Station. It's dedicated to someone called St. Ethelburga, that you probably haven't ever heard of. She was a 7th century abbess who led the religious community in Barking Abbey in Essex. She was the first woman leader of a religious community in this country. And she was renowned, celebrated as a great leader. She was committed to social action in a way that would have made John Wesley's heart sing. And she continued to care for the sick in her community right into the time of plague that hit London in the 8th century, in the 7th century. And it was the plague that ultimately killed her. The church is first recorded in 1250, a really old church, and it was rebuilt in the 15th century. It survived the Great Fire of London in 1666, and it survived World War II, apart from a minor bit of bomb damage. But then, in 1993, it was half destroyed when an IRA truck bomb exploded right outside, devastating the commercial area of Bishopsgate, which had been its target. You can imagine the print that it left on everyone's mind. A picture of devastation, of desecration, of despair. And it was so badly damaged, as you can see, that it was proposed that it should be demolished. But there was a public outcry, and it was in the end, thanks to public funding, rebuilt to its original plan. But inside, it was transformed. This tiny church, squeezed between tower blocks, became a centre of reconciliation. Reconciliation not just between different religious Christian communities, although the bomb was in people's minds as they did so, but between people of all communities and all faiths and none, who come to the church to pray, to meditate, to reflect, to talk. And in the courtyard at the back is a wonderful yurt, a nomadic tent-like structure. And you can see how warm it looks on the outside. And it does when you go in. And people come from the city, workers there, come and eat their lunch there, chat. But it's also a place for retreats, for fellowship, for deep conversation in the most wonderful way. But for me, the best thing about St Ethelburga's is the stained glass window in the church. I wonder whether you can see that it is St Ethelburga herself striding across the window with purpose, her head up, with conviction. And you may see something else as well, because when the church had been destroyed, parishioners and well-wishers came together and gathered up all the bits and pieces that they could find in the rubble significant to the old destroyed church, including all the tiny fragments, all the tiny shards of glass from the stained glass window. You go back. The other one comes later. I'll take. Thank you. And the artist, I don't know what they're called, the glass worker, incorporated all those bits of the old stained glass windows into the train of St Ethelburga's robe. Do you like it as a window? What do you like specially about it? Why do you like it? Sorry? The colours, yes. I mean, if she'd just had a black nun's habit, it wouldn't have had the same impact, wouldn't it? But it brings it alive. The movement in it, yes, it sweeps up and she's off, going to exercise her ministry. It's just wonderful. And it leaves, it stayed in my mind and memory for when I was thinking about this service. That's immediately the picture I thought of, and I went hunting for it. It speaks of something full of beauty and life that has been lovingly and painstakingly created. Think of all those cut fingers picking up those bits of glass, created from the violence and the destruction of hate and sectarianism. St Ethelburga's window speaks about the whole of the ministry of the church. It makes and it leaves an imprint of hope and restoration that God's love makes possible. In this week of prayer for Christian unity, we make a special effort, don't we, to come together as the whole body of Christ in all our different Christian traditions. We want this week to be one that leaves with us and with others a print of unity and care for each other. The story of Jonah that we're going to hear some of now leaves a very different kind of imprint. You remember the story of Jonah. God's called Jonah to take God's warning to the people of Nineveh. But Jonah is scared and he runs away to sea. And there's a great storm that results in him being flung overboard. And he's swallowed by a huge whale that carries him to where he should have been in the beginning, carries him to Nineveh. And we're going to pick up the story from that point, from chapter 3 of Jonah.
The reading is taken from Jonah chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, and Jonah chapter 3, verse 10 to chapter 4, verse 11. Once again the Lord spoke to Jonah. He said, "Go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to the people the message I have given you." So Jonah obeyed the Lord and went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to walk through it. Jonah started through the city, and after walking a whole day, he proclaimed, In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. The people of Nineveh believed God's message, so they decided that everyone should fast, and all the people, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth to show that they had repented. God saw what they did. He saw that they had given up their wicked behaviour, so he changed his mind and did not punish them as he had said he would. Jonah was very unhappy about this and became angry. So he prayed, "Lord, didn't I say before I left home that this is just what you would do? That's why I did my best to run away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a loving and merciful God, always patient, always kind, and always ready to change your mind and not punish. Now then, Lord, let me die. I am better off dead than alive." The Lord answered, "What right do you have to be angry?" Jonah went out east of the city and sat down. He made a shelter for himself and sat in its shade, waiting to see what would happen to Nineveh. Then the Lord God made a plant grow up over Jonah to give him some shade, so that he would be more comfortable. Jonah was extremely pleased with the plant. But at dawn the next day, at God's command, a worm attacked the plant and it died. After the sun had risen, God sent a hot east wind, and Jonah was about to faint from the heat of the sun beating down on his head. So he wished he were dead. "I'm better off dead than alive," he said. But God said to him, "What right do you have to be angry about the plant?" Jonah replied, "I have every right to be angry, angry enough to die." The Lord said to him, "This plant grew up in one night and disappeared the next. You didn't do anything for it, and you didn't make it grow, yet you feel sorry for it. How much more then should I have pity on Nineveh, that great city? After all, it has more than 120,000 innocent children in it, as well as many animals."
Thank you. After all Jonah's efforts to get as far away from Nineveh and from God as possible, when he finally does arrive in the city, his words leave a fantastic imprint. But Jonah is totally taken aback that people from a different culture, from a different nation, would be so ready to listen and change their ways. It doesn't fit the stereotype, the print he has in mind of them. And even when God rejoices, look at Jonah's reaction. It seems he'd been looking forward to seeing the destruction of God's enemies. Or is it that he is still so self-centered that all he's concerned about is that now he's going to look foolish because the dire warnings he's delivered aren't going to be realized? Can you imagine the print of Jonah's bottom as he sits in the sand and sulks and feels sorry for himself? Even when God causes a shrub to grow and give him shelter, he can't accept that God's concern for him is the same as God's concern for all people, and that God longs to restore them to himself. Jonah still isn't prepared to take that print into his heart. You know, even while the week of prayer for Christian unity is such a positive thing, we need to stop and ask why it's necessary. We need to reflect on the way in which Christian Western missionary societies imprinted our divisions and prejudices on new Christians who were coming to know Christ in other parts of the world. And we need to reflect on the devastating imprint that divisions between Roman Catholic and Protestant communities have scoured into politics as well as people across the world. South Sudan at the moment is one good example, and right on our doorstep, of course, in Northern Ireland. There's a popular expression in military circles. They talk about collateral damage. That's the word being used for the nearly 25,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza in recent months. It's the word used for all sorts of wars where people get killed. In Ukraine, all those people in that block of flats, they were collateral damage. St. Ethelburga's was collateral damage in terms of the intention of the IRA bomb. But collateral damage is often people, and people, as well as windows, can be broken into sharp, confusing fragments. And so the objectifying and the demonizing and the destruction of one people by another goes on and on and on. Let me show you that last slide again. In Advent, the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem unveiled its new nativity scene. At the heart of it is Jesus, swaddled in a Palestinian scarf, in a manger, in the midst of rubble. And all the other olive wood characters of the nativity scene that is put outside the church every year are standing round, looking on helplessly. The pastor of the church is one of the trustees and directors of Embrace, the ecumenical organisation which used to be the Bible Land Society, which many of us perhaps support, and which for over 100 years has supported different projects of all groups, all faiths, across the Middle East. Anyone who is marginalised or disadvantaged comes into their orbit of care. And the pastor said of the nativity scene that they had unveiled, it was inspired by the difficult images that we see on a daily basis on our television screens of children being pulled from under the rubble in Gaza. These images break us and are devastating. They are our relatives. We are tired of the world rationalizing and justifying the killing of our children. What imprint does the Bethlehem Nativity leave on us? Can we still say God is with us in the midst of the darkness and the suffering and the devastation? Does it spur us to pray harder, to respond with more imagination, that we might become better channels of God's love and care and peace? Our gospel reading comes from Matthew's Gospel, part of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount, that lasts for some 3 chapters near the beginning of Jesus' ministry. It begins with the blessings we know as the Beatitudes, which are so familiar that perhaps we don't hear as much as we could of what they are saying. And then Jesus goes on to talk about salt and light, and we're going to hear that now.
The reading is taken from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16. You are like salt for the whole human race. And if salt loses its saltiness, there is no way to make it salty again. It has become worthless, so it is thrown out and people trample on it. You are like light for the whole world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. Instead, it is put on the lampstand, where it gives light for everyone in the house. In the same way, your light must shine before people, so that they will see the good things you do and praise your Father in heaven.
In the Beatitudes, Jesus has been assuring those who want to follow him that despite or even through the inevitable hardships and suffering they'll experience, they will know the joy and the embrace, the joy of the embrace and blessing of God. It isn't easy being salt or light. Salt is scattered, it's not there as a block. You haven't got necessarily the comfort of being part of a big mass there. Salt is scattered in among the food or laid over the top to preserve it in countries where there is no refrigeration, especially in Jesus' day. Of course, there weren't fridges. Salt is used to cleanse, to heal, and that suggests that it's in a context of pain and injury. And who puts a light on when the sun's shining brightly? Lights are there to give light in the darkest of places, in the most threatening of situations, to make that tiny bit of difference that enables someone to see their way, to find their way to this city on the hill, across the rough ground. It's not easy being salt or light. St. Ethelburgers went through a terrible destruction. But the imprint that it left, that it leaves as you come away from it now, is one of restoration beyond or through that period of destruction. You can't look at that window when you know the story without remembering the bomb blast that shattered that original coloured glass. And in speaking of restoration and reconciliation beyond suffering, beyond brokenness, beyond fragmentation, St. Ethelburgers makes its mark not just on the local Christian community, but the wider community, and also on people of all communities, those who come on pilgrimage, those who come out of curiosity, those who come to use the location, perhaps not knowing the history, but because they've been told that this yurt is a good place to hold a retreat. It leaves a print of a God who longs to reconcile all people to God's self. But it isn't easy constantly leaving the imprint of grace and hope and love. Wonder what imprint Trinity leaves on the people who cross its threshold, on the people who come here during the week or to worship, who have a conversation about something that's happening here? What imprint does Trinity leave on the local community, on the ecumenical context in which you're set, churches you seek relationships with, or churches you have no relationship with? What imprint does Trinity leave on the life of our circuit together? What imprint does it leave on those that you reach out to in other parts of the world through your giving and the projects that you support? What imprint do you leave personally as you go about your daily life? You know that old joke of the farmer standing at his gate of his field in a rural area that doesn't have things like signposts, and where there's lots of windy roads and hedges that tower. And along comes a car, and the driver sticks his head out of the window and says, "Excuse me, how do you get to..." And he just looks at him and he says, "If I was going there, I wouldn't start from here." Our covenant services that we have just perhaps shared in remind us in our prayer of confession that I can't change who I was or how I was yesterday. But as we go on through the service with our covenant commitment made again, we remind ourselves, the service reminds us that we can, by God's grace, I can determine who I am today and who I am going to be tomorrow. We can choose Jonah's path of me first, us first. It's not just America that says that. Jonah's path of indifference. Jonah's path of anger when things don't go the way he wants. And in doing so, we can multiply the pain and the suffering of others and distance ourselves further, not just from them, but from God. Or we can reach out to catch God's vision and take the risks and make the sacrifices that Jesus is speaking of when he talks to his disciples, in order to restore what's been broken, what's been taken away in our community, in our nation, in our world. We might think of the way that our society, all that's familiar to us, is built on what was stripped from other parts of the world when the empire covered so much of the global map. All the assets that built our sewage systems and so much else. The people who came, taken from their home countries, invited to come after the war to help rebuild Britain. And now we are still stripping the assets of doctors and nurses trained at the cost of countries that need them desperately to work in the health service, where we can offer much more, but we leave other countries so much more impoverished. And that's by no means a criticism of those who come, but the way that we let the world be. In our week of prayer, we come together. And coming together, we remind ourselves that we can become different. We can make a difference for those who are gone unheeded for so long. And we can make a difference by following in Jesus' way, accepting the cost. We can still speak and act in a way that leaves an imprint that is a true expression of God's beauty and God's glory a true expression of God's love and God's care for all people and all creation.